All right. Thank you, Dr. Roberts, for
You're
that
welcome.
introduction. So
Hand
as
it
Dr.
over.
So as Dr. Roberts has mentioned, my name is Audra Johnson and I serve as the HR Training and Benefits Coordinator. So the purpose of today's workshop is to explore the advantages of working on campus and MGA's commitment to your professional growth, to gain insights into crafting a strong resume and practical tips for acing interviews and securing campus employment, and also for us to review a step-by-step guide through the application and hiring process, including eligibility requirements and resources for finding you the right opportunities. So let's just begin with discussing why MGA. At MGA, we are committed to fostering a positive and supportive work environment. And so most recently, we've been named a great college to work for, receiving honor roll recognition for some of the following key areas that you see here. And so we are committed to four core values, which include stewardship, engagement, adaptability, and learning. And so this is at the heart of everything that we do here. And so these principles not only guide everything that we do, but they also help us in HR ensure a workplace that promotes pride, success, purpose for faculty, staff, and students. And so, as student workers, you will play a pivotal role in helping to just build upon this recognition and also gaining the necessary skills and experiences that you need as professionals, even as you continue to attend MGA and graduate as lifelong learners. And so that leads into our employment eligibility.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Leslie. As stated, I'm a senior human resource generalist here with the school. But let's talk about the eligibility for employment as a student assistant or a federal work study. So the requirements are that you will need to be in at least half time at Middle Georgia in your classes. So that's enrolled in 6 credit hours or 2 full courses. Um, your minimum GPA to maintain is a 2.0. You're limited to the work hours of 19 per week, so that you have time for your classes and your sessions. You, as a student worker, you may be able to work during the summer and during breaks as long as there's funding available. And if you have any further questions on the student assistant side, then you can actually contact me at Human Resources or anyone else. Then, as a federal work study, some of the requirements are that you do have to complete a FAFSA each year. It's limited to 19 hours to work per week. It runs through financial aid. So if you will contact the FWS jobs at mga.edu, you can find out if you qualify for those. Some of the other things that we want to talk about is your self-assessment of your abilities. You're going to be looking at your skills, your learned behaviors, and your abilities. And it's like, what do you have? Do you have problem solving, communication, critical thinking? Are you proficient with computers, customer service skills? Do you have any certifications? Those are some skills that you may have. Along with that, you're going to look at your interests and your passions because you want a position that drives your values, that has meaning and cause. And you also want to build on what you learned from your childhood experiences. You want something that's motivating you. Part of all of this is to seek job and career goals. So you want financial security, whether you're pursuing higher achievements such as leadership roles and things like that. But it's an area of interest that you want to explore because these self assessments will help you build a resume, will help you build your cognitive things that will go with you beyond now and into the future. So let's talk about the hiring process here at Middle Georgia. So one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to apply for a position. Then you're going to go through an interview process, and the manager is going to make the selection from the interview process. And the interview could be a one-on-one, it could be a virtual, it could even be a telephone interview. But they're going to try mostly to have students come in and do one-on-one interviews. You may also sit in front of a panel, depending on what area you end up working in. Once the manager has made its selection from the interview candidates, then they're going to move over into offering the position, and that's going to come from human resources. And when we do that process of doing the offer, we're going to also go ahead and start a background check, which is a requirement for working with the state or working at MGA in general. The background check is going to include criminal, education. There's going to check out your residencies. It may even do a credit check depending on what areas that you're in. Once the background is complete, then we actually start the onboarding process. And with the onboarding process, we'll do an I-9 verification, which will be validating you are who you say you are. And then also doing policies, what expectations are, and other significant documentations. So that's our hiring process here at Middle Georgia. It can take a little bit sometimes. So we really, when you get offered a job, and everything, and that's the goal for everyone, be attentive to emails coming in, communication coming in, so that you can be on top of what's going on. Okay. Where can you find our jobs here at MGA? So you can go to our human resources page, and you can actually see that on the right-hand side, there's a menu that says career opportunities. And once you go there, it takes you to our career opportunity page, which talks about where you would go working with us, being a great college. But if you'll click on the faculty, staff, and student job opening link that is there, it takes you to our careers page. This is our applicant tracking system that we have. You can log in, create a new user. But you don't have to just to look at the jobs. So if you want to view jobs, go down to the bottom and view jobs. If you're interested in a job, you can apply for it. You will have to create an account if you don't already have one. Some of the overview for our application. Our application is completely online. Everything needs to be factual in it because we do run a background check. So you do your best to know your social security number, have that information available for you to put in. You won't put it in the application, but you'll put it in the background. We do disqualify. We do have some discrepancies that may disqualify you if there's something in your background that comes back. But we will discuss all of those things with you. We don't reveal any information to anyone else. You're going to sign your application. It's very impertinent that you have accurate information in your application because that's going to lead you to the next steps of everything. So what are the components of an application? So you're going to put your personal contact information, like your email, your telephone number. You can use your personal email or you can use your MGA email. Just be sure to be attentive about following up in your emails and checking all of that, or returning phone calls if someone calls you. You're going to put your work experience. You're also going to put your level of education, references if you have any. You may not have any references, but it's okay. A lot of times, if you're new as a freshman here, this may be one of your first jobs that you have, and that's great. We're here to support you in any way that we can. You do have to do a questionnaire, and it asks if you're eligible to work in the United States, if you need sponsorship, or do you have any job-related experience. One of the requirements of our application is that you put in a resume, and it's very pertinent that you do a resume that's very informative, but it's simple. It doesn't need to have a lot of fanciness to it. It needs to be straight to the point and accurate on what you're applying for.
Yeah, and on that note, we're going to talk a little bit more about resumes, a little bit more in depth. Again, I'm Dr. Heather McIntosh, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for Career and Leadership Development. And so, yes, as Ms. Leslie mentioned, all applications for any student job that you're going to apply for requires a resume. And yeah, you might be repeating some of the same information that you put on your application, but honestly, that's very common. In any other jobs you apply to, professional jobs that you apply to in the future, that's probably going to happen. But again, that's part of why we require a resume for any student job, is that we consider these professional jobs. And honestly, the process that students have to do to apply for a job at MGA is the same one that for full-time staff roles, for faculty roles, the process is the same across the board because we view them all as professional jobs at MGA. So as Ms. Leslie mentioned, as far as, some basic resume tips, things to kind of be on the lookout for, some do's and don'ts. You do want your resume to be easy to read. You want it to be polished, professional, clean, and easy to read. Often, students, like, they're trying to put one together quickly or trying to do one more conveniently, and they'll just go to somewhere just to use an online template. And that's very common. We see that a lot. But those really aren't going to work in your favor for multiple reasons. They can be really hard to manipulate and edit and work with. Sometimes they are pre-formatted with these boxes that you can't make bigger, you can't make smaller. It can create weird spacing. Sometimes it won't upload properly. Certain application systems, it'll upload weird. And sometimes they have specific sections on there that, like, you can't get rid of. Like, for example, some will have a space for you to put your picture, which kind of touches on the next point. You don't need to put, unless you're going for acting or modeling, you should not have a picture on your resume. But some templates out there make you think you do. Some templates out there will have sections for, like, hobbies, and again, that's typically not something you would want on your resume. So again, you want to do clean, polished, easy to read, format free, just from a Microsoft Word document. You can just go to Microsoft Word from there. If you already have a resume that you used a template for, it's easy to kind of copy and paste your information and move it onto a Word document. Just, again, make it kind of easier to read on the hiring manager. I've already kind of touched on the fact that you don't want to include photos. You don't need to include other extra personal details. I've seen resumes before where they list their birth date. We don't need to know your birth date. You just kind of want to stick to the basic experiences, your educational experiences, work experiences, skills. You want to stick to those things. And based on that, if you do have past experiences, you want to talk about those, but you want to talk about those in a way that really highlights your accomplishments and the skill sets that you gained from those experiences. Sometimes I'll see resumes where all the person does is just list the job title, and that's it. And it doesn't talk about anything about what they did in that role, what skills they gained in that role. So you definitely want to have some bullets. You want to describe what you did, but focusing on skill sets. One kind of piece of advice is, for every bullet that you do, make sure it highlights a specific kind of skill set that you could read that bullet and be like, oh, they must have gained this kind of skill, or obviously they're saying that this was a specific skill they were using, whether it's, collaborating on a team, whether it's a multitasking, being detail oriented. You want each bullet to kind of highlight that, because that's what employers are looking for. They want to know about your skills and results of what you did, not just a list of your tasks that are, like, very short. I see that a lot. Now, as far as your education section, as someone who has hired a lot of student workers over the years, I've seen a lot of student resumes for these roles. One thing I see quite often, admittedly, is that students will just reuse the resume that they did in high school. A lot of students wind up creating one in high school, and so you might already have one, but you wind up just uploading that version. You don't update it in any way. It doesn't even list MGA on it. So you want to make sure any kind of version you might have that might be from high school, update it, make sure to add Middle Georgia State University, make sure to add the degree that you're going for, and even, like, when you expect to graduate. You don't necessarily need to list the semester you started, but it is kind of good to know, when you expect to graduate. Are you graduating next year? Are you graduating in a few years? It's okay if you don't have the exact semester, if you're not quite sure, but as best as you can, it's good to add that too. But yeah, definitely make sure to add your MGA information to your resumes, because quite often I see resumes that don't list MGA at all on it, even though you're a student. Also, proofreading, I mean, it can be kind of tricky, because sometimes we just look at anything that spell check will highlight, like the red squiggly lines. But keep in mind, they're not, if you misspell a word, but it's still an actual word, it might not highlight it. Another thing that I see very often with resumes is section titles that are in all caps, because often, you have those sections in all caps. Spell check doesn't do spell check for anything in all caps, because they view it as it views it as an acronym. So, for example, I've looked at some resumes recently where work experience, that section title, the word experience was very clearly misspelled, but whoever was putting it together obviously didn't realize it, because it didn't indicate it with that red line. And I see section titles being misspelled very, very, very often, and it's because we kind of blindly trust the spell check, the red line, and that's all we're looking for. Otherwise, we don't pay much attention. But if you have multiple spelling errors, grammar errors. Again, it kind of just shows a lack of attention to detail. And also it shows that you might have rushed it, you didn't take your time with it, which could indicate you're not taking it that seriously. And that's kind of a theme that we really want to, touch on, is that you should take these jobs seriously, but also the preparation for them, getting your materials together. The materials, they should be thoughtful. You should have taken time working on them. The resume should show that you're taking it seriously. It shouldn't look like it was thrown together, or that you just, maybe reused something from high school and it's completely outdated. So yeah, you really want to make sure to look it over. And also I'll add formatting too. I mean, it might seem like a small thing, but I've seen so many resumes that sometimes I'll see resumes where it's like different bullet points and you got one bullet list of bullets here, but then somewhere else it's down here, and then somewhere else it's back over here. Take like a broad view of your resume, make sure everything's lined up properly, make sure everything's spaced properly. I've seen resumes where some sections are double spaced, but then the section underneath it isn't, where this section is in a really small font and this section is in a different font, or they're in different font types. Again, it just kind of shows a lack of attention to detail, and that you didn't take your time with it. Also, one misconception that I've seen over the years is that sometimes, people believe, oh, the longer my resume is, the more impressive it is. Like if I can list all these things I did, that's going to look really good. You want your resume to be one full page, and you want it to be easy to skim, easy to read. And, a hiring manager just wants to be able to quickly look over it and see your education background, see any experiences you had. They're not trying to read multiple pages worth of stuff. And honestly, they're not going to, or they're not going to sit there and take several minutes to read, 30 bullets that you have for one job. But it is something I see sometimes where, so it's a myth that the longer the better. You want it short, you want it one full page. And sometimes I've worked with students who are like, hey, I haven't really had any past work experiences, and their resume is like way too short. It might just have their contact information and then maybe an objective and their education, and that's it. You can work with our office, and I'll recommend that a few more times. You can certainly work with our office to get help building it up. There's certainly other things that you can consider putting in there, skills and, maybe class projects, any volunteer experiences, things that maybe you're not thinking about as you're putting it together. We can work with you to build it to that one full page. But that's really the goal, is to have one full, clean, polished page. And, it's obvious usually, to hiring managers if you threw one together quickly. So again, take your time with it. Honestly, you can even take time to where you have time to actually meet with a career advisor to have them look it over first before you submit it. But yeah, don't rush and throw it together, because it'll wind up being obvious. That's when we see the misspellings. That's when we see things that aren't lined up properly. That's when we see only job titles and not much description of the jobs underneath at all. So yeah, you want to take your time with it. And as I mentioned before, our office certainly helps with resumes. On top of being able to meet with a career advisor to go over your resume, we want to make it as easy for y'all to put together a nice polished one. We want to make it as easy as possible. So we have a lot of samples on our website as well. An easy way to get to our website is mga.edu/CCLD. Short for Center for Career and Leadership Development. That's just an easy, quick way to get directly to our webpage. And then over on the side, you'll see a section that says Services. And if you hit the drop down, you'll see where we have a designated resume section. And on there, it has a lot of good information about resumes, a lot of good resources on like what each section, should entail, what kind of sections should be on there, kind of some do's and don'ts. But towards the bottom, we also have a lot of sample resumes as well that you can kind of use as a template. It's not exactly a template because it's format free, which again is what we recommend. You can open it up and just kind of plug your information in, but you can change it however you want. You can move things around. You can delete sections that might not be relevant to what you're applying for. So we want to make sure that you all are able to put together one, in as easy a way as possible using our samples. And then, of course, like I said, you can make an appointment afterwards to get that reviewed by our office. And you can do that through our platform Handshake. So you would actually make the appointment at mga.joinhandshake.com. You would use your MGA email to activate your account if you haven't yet. It only takes a few minutes, and then you'd be able to easily schedule that appointment. So this is one example of one of the resumes we have in that resume sample section on our website. I think this one is labeled general resume. And so again, you can look at it more for just the formatting part of it, not have to worry about formatting. You can put your name in the name section, put your contact information in that. And it's got some kind of tips along the way that you can kind of use as you're putting together the different sections, what you should be listing in these sections, how you should put together your bullets. So it can kind of help guide you along the way. We do also have samples for specific majors too, ones that are like, a student in this type of academic program. This would be, stuff on the resume that maybe, you should consider, aspiring to. Like these are accomplishments and things that they did in the past that would look good on a resume that would be beneficial. So you can also look at the specific sample ones we have for different majors as well to kind of guide you on like, if they have some clubs listed, maybe those are clubs that I should consider joining. I'm in that same academic program as this sample resume. So yeah, so you can utilize any of those to put together your resume. So now you got the resume down, you've submitted your application, you've submitted your resume, maybe had it already reviewed by our office beforehand ahead of time, so it's good to go. At this point, you're going to be waiting to see if they reach out to you for an interview. And so one thing I'll say is, again, keep in mind if you've applied to student jobs on campus, you're not going to necessarily know how they're going to reach out. Some places might call you to set up an interview. Others might send you an email. I know somebody on campus who hires student workers, and they told me they purposely email students to set up interviews. And part of it is to kind of test and see how often they check their email. And so if they email, and again, they're not necessarily trying to schedule these out 2 weeks ahead of time. I mean, sometimes there's some time sensitivity. So they might reach out to you on a Friday and trying to schedule it for maybe the following Tuesday or something. And so if you're not checking your email that often, you might miss your opportunity. As far as phone calls go, make sure you have your voicemail set up. There's been times where I've called and a voicemail hasn't been set up, and I'm not going to sit there and keep calling over and over again. I might call a second time, but if I call a couple of times and I can't leave a voicemail and you don't recognize the number, again, you might have missed your opportunity. So just be very mindful of having your voicemail set up, answering the phones, realizing it might be a hiring manager calling to set up an interview, and checking your email often because you just don't know how they're going to reach out. And on that note, if you do answer the phone, just make sure to answer in a nice professional way. I've sometimes had people before answer and it was kind of like I seemed like I was bothering them or annoying them, like, who is this? And you kind of don't want to start off on that foot with a hiring manager. And then if you're going to email about the job, whether it's maybe you applied and maybe it's been some days and you hadn't heard anything and you're just kind of wanting to see when they're going to schedule interviews, or maybe you're asking some extra questions about the job, just make sure that those are written professionally, full sentences, proper grammar, proper capitalization. I have had students reach out before to inquire about a job we had open, and the grammar was really poor. It seemed like they were doing it on their phone. They weren't really taking their time. And honestly, it kind of turned me off from wanting to give them an interview because, professional communications are very important for pretty much any role at MGA. In a student role, professional communications are very important. So whether it's written or otherwise, you don't want to make a bad first impression just reaching out asking a question about the job. You don't want to all of a sudden, possibly have a strike against you because you just quickly threw together some sort of email on your phone and it auto corrected certain words and you didn't even look it over before you hit send. Yeah, so be mindful of that. So say, you get the interview lined up. You respond, you're able to talk to the person, you get a day and time set. You need to prepare for the interview, obviously. And these next few things I'm going to touch on, I really am speaking more from like personal experience of doing interviews with a lot of students over the years. These are things I see fairly often that we really just want to make sure you all are mindful of, that you all are aware of, so that you're properly prepared. Reading the job description in advance. I mean, that might sound like a given, but really pay attention to what that role entails, what the specific job duties are going to be, whether you think it would even be a good fit for you. Another big reason why is because you're probably going to get asked at some point in the interview about like why you're interested in that role or what skills do you think you would bring to that role. Those are very common type of interview questions. We ask them ourselves. And there's been several times where, I ask that type of question and a student's just kind of like, Well, what exactly is this role doing again? What exactly are the responsibilities? I've had that question before, and it was obvious they didn't really read the job description. And that goes back to it looks like you're not taking it seriously. It just looks like you're not taking it seriously. And you want to make sure to not come off that way and that you're viewing this as a real professional job. And on that note, research the department itself ahead of time. One of the questions that I usually ask in any interview I do with a student is, so what do you know about our office? Have you used our services before? And fairly often over the years, fairly often I get an answer that's, yeah, I don't really know much about your office. Like, I'm not sure what all your office does. I get that fairly often. And again, it only would take 5 minutes to go to our website and just get a basic idea of the basic services that we offer. We do have a lot on our website, so we have a lot of resources. If you're able to even talk about some of those, even better. But just to get an idea of like what are the basic services that this office provides. And another thing I'll add is like what hours that office is open. I've done interviews before where students, it gets to a point where we're kind of talking about like their work availability, what would their potential availability look like? And they're like, I can do nights and weekends. Our office isn't open nights and weekends. And I've had that multiple times. So, make sure you know when the office is open, because obviously that's going to be part of the dialogue too, is the availability if you were to be extended the job offer. And there are some common interview questions. You're likely going to get, one about tell me about yourself. That's usually how a lot of interviews start. Often there's going to be questions kind of related to what are your strengths, what are maybe areas of improvement, but it's not at 100% that you'll get those. The one thing I can guarantee is that for pretty much any interview you ever go on, it will end with the interviewer asking if you have any questions for them. Always try to have some questions. Always try to have some questions because otherwise it shows kind of a lack of interest. Even if you've read the job description, if you've thoroughly looked over the website, and maybe they've even offered some extra information, during the actual interview part, they're never going to have answered every question you have about the job. So it really shows that you have a real interest in the role to ask some follow-up questions. And, it doesn't have to be a bunch, maybe just a couple. But it could be questions like, what does a typical day look like in this office? Or who am I going to be working more closely with in this office? What does onboarding and training look like in this role? Like, how are we trained? What are the specific skill sets that are going to be most beneficial for this role? There's definitely things that you can ask that won't have been answered already by the time it gets to that. So always try to have at least a couple of questions prepared. Next slide, please.
Before we move on, it looks like Leah has her or his hand raised. Do we have a question right now before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Okay.
Let's see, I can read it.
So it's she's asking about her because she has last 15 hours of job experience. So one of the things is you need at least one resume page, but you can have more as long as it's relevant to the job that you're in or the job that you're seeking. So it's wiser to have at least one page because it doesn't it's not too crowded. It's not too over to do the 15 hours of job experience. So that's why we recommend the one page resume.
Yeah.
But you can have additional, so.
Yeah, it's like I'm 47. I'm a returning student, and when I did the resume here, they were like, just do the last 15 to 20 years, and that should be it. And I'm like, but I only had 2 jobs in the last 20 years. So the rest of it was lots of different stuff. I didn't know if I needed to include that or just stick with the last, 2 jobs.
So I'll jump in. There's a little bit of subjectivity. I tell students this all the time. We all might have a slightly different answer to that. One thing that I recommend that you could consider is, as Dr. Roberts mentioned, if you have any directly relevant experience, you do want to make sure to include that. Even if it's, not one of your last 2, most recent jobs, you do want to make sure to include relevant experience. One thing I recommend sometimes is you could have an experience section where you list the more relevant roles and, flesh those out a little more with bullets, describing the skills. And sometimes you can have like an additional experience section that literally lists like the other jobs you've had without giving like as much description to them. Because if it's going to create like a weird gap, potentially, if you're worried about that, then that's kind of something you do to kind of fix that. But there's a couple different things you can do with that. Yeah,
Cool,
there's a
thank
little bit
you.
of subjectivity with that. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I would also say for someone who is applying for a professional position at Middle Georgia State, the 2-page resume, as long as things are relevant, I think sometimes
Right.
people go way too back.
Right.
They're putting jobs that like, hey, I don't want to, if I don't want to talk about it in an interview, I shouldn't be taking up a lot of space in my resume. But if you're applying for student jobs, I would stick to the 1 page so that sometimes people, they'll look at resumes and make decisions about, oh, this person, they really want full time. They don't want a student job. And so they might overlook you for a student position if that's what you're really wanting. Now, if you're applying for a professional position, it very well could be like just like Ms. Leslie and Dr. McIntosh said that, you could have a 2-page, the information's relevant, include it. But I always think about your audience, who's going to be reading the resume and what the position's for, and you may change it based on what your goal is.
Yeah, well, hopefully that answers your question. Of course, if you have more, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll happily answer any others that you or anybody else has. So staying with the interview prep piece, dressing for the interview. This might seem, obviously when you look at this, it's like, oh, obviously the one on the left would be the one who looks interview ready. Well, I'll be completely honest, in my years of interviewing for student workers, I would say almost just as often I've seen students come to the interview dressed as the one in the right, kind of in their workout gear. Students, they might have dressed comfortably to go to class and they got the interview set up after class and they just decide to just go straight to the interview wearing what they wore to class and they were trying to, again, be kind of comfy. You need to make sure, again, to take it seriously. And that looks like you're not taking it seriously. If you're coming dressed in workout clothes or, sweats. I remember I had one colleague once say that somebody came to an interview for her student position in pajamas. I've heard that before. And that just leaves a really bad first impression because it makes it seem like you're not taking it seriously. Now, that being said, there's not an expectation that y'all are going to have like 3-piece suits or like super professional clothing. We do have a clothing closet in our Macon and Cochrane offices to try to help students build up their professional wardrobe and their business wardrobe. All clothing items are between $1 and $5. It's very, very low cost. So we do have initiatives in our office to help students build up their wardrobe. But it's not an expectation you would already have like a wardrobe full of nice interview clothes and suits. That being said, again, try to dress as nice as you can. Like if you have just a nice top, whether it's a polo, a blouse, nicer pair of like black pants, khakis, nicer like black shoes. You just kind of want to wear like, something that, again, if you can get as close to as business as you can, you just want to show that you're taking it seriously. So just some other kind of overall quick resume do's and don'ts. You do always want to try to arrive early. 15 minutes is kind of the standard. You don't necessarily want to arrive super, super early. You don't want to arrive like 45 minutes early because sometimes that'll actually kind of throw off whether it's a hiring manager or whether it's kind of a panel. Sometimes that can kind of throw their schedule off a little if they know somebody's already out there waiting. They feel maybe rushed to get through what they're working on because they feel bad that somebody's going to be waiting for that long. So yeah, if you happen to get to where you need to be more than 15 minutes early, I'd say like maybe hang out in the lobby area, maybe walk around and get familiar with the building that you're in. If it's nice weather, you can just wait outside, wait in your car. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily get to the interview way, way, way early, but 15 minutes, but you definitely want to try to get there early. Always bring a pen and paper for notes. One thing I already touched on was the fact that, at the end of the interview, they're going to ask if you have any questions. There might be things that you think of as the interview is going on that you want to like, oh, I should ask a question about that. Or, oh, that made me think of a question I want to ask. They might offer more information about the job or about aspects of it that wasn't in the job description. So you might want to take notes to make sure you remember that. So yeah, any honestly, even outside of interviews, any meeting that you go to, you should always have pen and paper. You know, that's something I learned when I was starting to, enter my professional roles. Always have pen and paper when you go to any kind of meeting. You always want to make sure to, offer to shake hands with those you're interviewing with. You want to make sure that you're making good eye contact, that it seems like you're paying attention and listening. I know, sometimes people with their eye contact, if they're kind of like looking around the room, they might be listening, but it doesn't look like they're listening, even if they actually are. So you want to be mindful of that and making sure it looks like that you're listening and that you're paying attention, you know. Again, you want to ask some thoughtful questions. You might think of them as the interview's going on, but it's good to try and also have some prepared ahead of time too. And it's always really good to send a thank you email, usually like within 24 hours, 48 at most, but usually try and within 24 hours, send a quick thank you email to those you interviewed with. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be like, multiple sentences. It could be just a quick, expressing your interest again. Thank you so much for the opportunity to interview with your department. I'm really interested in this position because of XYZ. I was, happy to hear more about it. Look forward to hearing from you. However it is, it could just be a few sentences. But yeah, it's always good to try to send a quick thank you email within 24 hours after the interview if you can. And then as far as follow-up goes, you don't want to be too persistent because you don't know what their interview schedule looks like. They might be interviewing several other students. In fact, more often than not, they are. They might be interviewing several other students, and that might be spread out over the next week or so. Hopefully the hiring manager would give an idea of when you would hear something back. They should be doing that on their end. But if not, or you could even ask, that could be a question you ask, like, is there a certain time, I should check back in, I mean, that if they don't volunteer that could be something you go ahead and ask. Otherwise, yeah, give it a little time before you follow up. Give it, up to 2 weeks before you follow up. Don't follow up like 2, 3 days later. And yes, obviously posture is important. You want to look, professional. Posture is important with that. Comfortable positions like sitting with your arms crossed. It might be comfortable, but it can kind of come across a little, what's the word I'm trying to say? It can come off a little like, like you look irritable, you look disinterested, you just don't want to give that impression. As far as dress, we've kind of touched on that. Dress as nicely as you can. Of course, we have the professional closet to help with that. Be very mindful of your language. You don't want to accidentally have something slip that's unprofessional. And as far as personal issues, a lot of interviews start off with the question, tell us a little bit about yourself. You don't need to go into your whole life story. You don't need to go into like where you were born, how old you are. Typically, as Ms. Leslie was talking about with that self-assessment, think about those kinds of things like, what are your career goals? Like, why are you in school? What degree are you pursuing and why? What are your interests? What are your skill sets? Those would be the kind of things to touch on in that kind of question instead of like going into your whole backstory. That's not quite what that question is framed for. As far as your phone, if you can, would be good to just, leave it in your car or leave it in your room and not bring it, just to kind of make sure to prevent it buzzing. Even if you have it on silent, sometimes phones will buzz. Definitely make sure to have it on silent if you do need to have it with you. But otherwise, it might be good if you can to just leave it somewhere else until after the interview, just to make sure there's no accidental distractions from it. And then often, and we'll touch on this more in just a minute, often there's usually questions like situational questions, or it's like, describe a time when this happened, tell us about a time when this happened. And that might make you, talk about like certain incidents or situations that you've been a part of. You want to be really mindful if you are describing a situation that you're not talking negatively about other colleagues or employers, classmates. Again, that doesn't give a good impression, and it also can make the hiring manager be like, oh, if they're talking negatively about their former employer, are they going to down the line talk negatively about me? So you don't want to give that impression. So just be very mindful of not speaking negatively about former colleagues or employers. So touching on what I just said, these behavioral type questions, as they're often referred to, the give me an example of, describe a time when this happened. There is a certain strategy that's recommended for answering these types of questions. And again, it could be like, describe a time where you had to take initiative on something. Tell us about a time where you had to deal with a difficult customer. Tell us about a time when you had to handle a conflict or something didn't go as planned and you had to figure something out. And it's called the STAR method. And, it kind of describes it here in this slide. This is a way to go about answering a question. It keeps your answer focused, keeps you from rambling. And so we definitely recommend for any of those types of questions, trying to come up with a STAR method response. So again, the S is basically, I'll give you an example. If an interviewer says, tell me about a time you had to take the lead or initiative on a task. First you want to describe the situation. Well, one time I was in a group project and we were getting behind on things. We weren't really communicating. It didn't seem like anybody, knew what their exact role was, and it just seemed like things weren't getting done. That's the situation. The task. So what is it that needs to get done? So the task. So I wanted to make sure that we wound up getting together and getting a plan in action. And starting to, get the project together to make sure we could turn it in on time. So what action? What did you do? What did you do to help, put this into action? So, I decided to go ahead and reach out and designate roles to everybody. I decided to go ahead and suggest certain deadlines when everybody needed to have their part due. I suggested dates for us to be able to meet so that we could have some meetings to go over everything, and I offered to take all the pieces and put it together for, the first draft for us to go over. Okay. And then what was the result of that? As a result of that, we were able to meet all the deadlines. We were able to get everything turned in on time, and we got an A on the project. So that's kind of just an example of how you can go about answering those types of questions. So, we've touched on our office obviously a few times already. Again, we're the Center for Career and Leadership Development. We do go by CCLD, so you will see things that say CCLD for short, and that's our office. And there's a lot of different ways that we can help y'all. If you're looking for jobs on campus, of course, we can help with, getting your resume together. We have those samples if you want to go ahead and get a draft together. But again, you can certainly meet with a career advisor to get help with that. Obviously, if you're looking for jobs on campus, you might be looking just for jobs in general, trying to get experience in general. So you can make job search appointments, internship search appointments, and you can work with a career advisor to get maybe other ideas of opportunities that might be a good fit for you. You would make that appointment in Handshake. I mentioned earlier, mga.joinhandshake.com. You can also make mock interview appointments. You can make an appointment just to have a one-on-one mock interview with a career advisor, and they would do it like an actual normal interview and then give you some good feedback afterwards. But I do want to spend a couple minutes. We also have a newer software called Big Interview. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's an interview related software where you can actually practice your interview skills, and you can do a practice interview. You can record it. So you can record yourself doing an interview and get some generated AI feedback from that. You can they have a question bank where you can even maybe go ahead and pick out the questions that you want asked, or they can go ahead and formulate the questions based on a certain job. So if it's a job related to IT or something, it'll be an interview where they'll generate questions that would be the type of questions you might get in that type of interview. So yeah, it's a really good software to use where you can record yourself doing a resume, get feedback. There's also a resume component to it as well. It's called Big Resume that you can get to from the homepage of Big Interview. And that's also something you could utilize as another resume resource our office provides. It has a resume builder on there. So if you are going to use a resume builder, that's the one we would suggest you all do. But it also has a section where you can scan the job you're applying for, scan your current resume version, and it'll give you advice. It'll, scan it and give you AI advice on like what are some keywords that you might want to use, what are some things you might want to add or switch out to tailor it as best as it can to that specific job. So yeah, it's mga.biginterview.com. So yeah, mga.biginterview.com. You would use your MGA email to quickly set up an account similar to Handshake. And so we definitely suggest you all check that out because you can practice anytime, day or night, nights and weekends. And then, of course, I mentioned the closet a few times. We have a professional clothing closet in Macon. It's housed in the Student Life Center, room 261. In Cochran, it's in Sanford Hall, suite 112. You can come check it out. You can make an appointment on Handshake to get a designated time to come shop. So yeah, we definitely recommend y'all check that out if you can. And then, of course, we do a lot of events and programs in our office. And of course, some of them are related to finding jobs and networking. So we do have etiquette dinner on our Cochrane campus happening on February 25th. We're actually going to have some alum there as well. Give you just kind of a chance to practice your networking skills. You could even, talk to alumni, get an idea of how they landed some of their first jobs that they had. So yeah, that would be a good thing. And we have a mock interview day. So of course you can make a one-on-one appointment at any time to get a mock interview with a career advisor. But we actually have a designated day on our Macon campus on March 5th where we're going to have recruiters from different industries come and actually do mock interviews with students. So you would have the chance to actually get a mock interview done with a real recruiter in the field. We try to match them up as best we can. But yeah, it's good to, the only way to get better at interviews is practice. I mean, there's just no getting around it. The best way to get better at interviews, the more practice you have, the better you'll get. So definitely take advantage of all these different ways if you can. We have a big career fair on our Macon campus called the All Industry Career Fair. We're going to have that in Macon on March 17th. And sometimes students think, oh, they hear career fair and they think, oh, this is probably just for the seniors or those looking for full-time jobs or recent graduates. But that's not true. We have opportunities. We have all different types of opportunities. A lot of the companies we have part-time opportunities. A lot of them offer internship opportunities. So yeah, even if you're looking for something more part-time right now, there will be a lot of opportunities at this fair. So we definitely recommend y'all checking that out. Before that, on March 10th, we're going to have kind of like a practice career fair. It'll be in the lobby of the Student Life Center building, and you can come and kind of go to different employer booths just to kind of get tips and advice on how to navigate certain aspects of a career fair, like what kind of questions to expect from employers if you go to their table, how to do research ahead of time. And so it's kind of like it's a way to get some practice if you've never been to a career fair before. If you're an aviation student, we do have an aviation specific career fair happening in April. And again, they're going to have all different kinds of opportunities at that event as well. Yeah, and then this is just more information about our office as far as where we're located, our social, some of our social media. There's the Handshake website again. We do have a departmental email. If you have any questions after today, please feel free to email us. We'd be happy to answer. And then, of course, Human Resources has offices in Macon and Cochrane as well. And there's their email address as well if you wind up having any questions for them after today.